Okay. AKA finally getting the people whining about Diamond Demption to shut up. The strictly speaking series of events in this episode and the following are probably a bit more low-key than people were expecting coming off the heels of, well, it was good to catch up with Homeworld. It was good to get a brief glimpse into things like the Zircons and the Pebbles and neat new pearl design, along with the confirmation that the Diamonds did in fact relinquish their authority. It's just good to know that the system which caused all these problems has finally been curbed. Plus points to Connie for spreading the idea of democracy, I guess. Really all of Homeworld has progressed so nicely via Steven's influence, and the way so much of that is displayed in simple visual exposition over just a few seconds is something to be admired. Pearls can have jobs of their own choosing, those living walls are free to mill about, heck there's plants now, and the Diamonds themselves have basically dedicated their lives to becoming a trio of public servants. This, I think, warrants more discussion since, surprisingly to me anyway, the Diamonds still being allowed to ostensibly roam free remains a sticking point with fans who are unsatisfied with the way they were handled in Change Your Mind. Now look, I think we can all agree that Change Your Mind was a little more than a little rushed, for reasons not entirely within the Crewniverse's control. But I've always maintained that it was both a smart and thematically consistent writing move and just a practical choice on the part of the characters in universe to have the Diamonds, well, not necessarily redeemed, that's the wrong word, more like made to see the error of their ways and made to become helpful members of a much more functional society. Rebecca Sugar has made it clear in interviews that Steven, though willing to tolerate them as they now service the greater good, never really forgave the Diamonds, White especially, and I think this whole episode makes that clear. From the confirmation that Steven has been actively avoiding them since the movie, to the fact that, he thinks about murdering one of them, and I can't believe how many viewers still exist who fail even now to grasp why that's a bad thing? Say what you will about how the Diamonds were evil, fascist dictators who have a lot to make up for, but here's the thing, they are making up for it. That doesn't mean you or I or especially Steven have to like them as people or forgive them for their specific wrongs against him, but to say that even as White has become a positive force in the universe, Steven is still justified in putting her head through a wall,
How can you be so obtuse?
Hurting White or Blue or Yellow after they've proven willing and able to change doesn't fix Steven's trauma. It doesn't teach them anything, and it creates a worse situation for everyone else in their orbit. There's no benefit to it other than Steven, and clearly certain viewers, getting a brief, fleeting rush of satisfaction. Think Thor chopping Thanos' head off. Satisfying in the moment, but who did it help? What was actually made better by that decision? Steven will probably never forgive the Diamonds, and I don't expect the Diamonds to ever fully realize why he's so personally uncomfortable with them. For as much as they've improved, that seems beyond their grasp. But to pretend that keeping the Diamonds around in their current capacity isn't still a net good for the universe is just silly and dumb and silly. Stop it. Whether or not you want to say they're redeemed, existing as they do, they serve a positive function that makes almost everyone else in the universe's lives a little bit better. Blue literally projects good emotions onto people, the ethics of which I suppose are still a little debatable, but who doesn't like to feel nice? And look, I'm not gonna lie, Yellow reconstructing broken gems like a mix of mad scientist and hairdresser is just great. The most interesting and meaningful, I think, though, is White. What we can infer from her brief mention of what she's gotten up to off Homeworld is just really interesting, letting her powers be utilized to give gems who have no voice a platform in the form of the biggest, baddest gem there is, echoing their words. It would be beyond fascinating to see that in practice, but of course I'm most interested in the character perspective. White, the gem who literally used everyone else around her as puppets or tools, is here now letting herself become everyone else's puppet. Even if she does still have a bit of a grandstanding egotism about her, I don't know if you could ask for a better means of servicing other people than physically letting your body either be a giant megaphone for public discourse or a mirror for self-therapy. You may not have to call White a good person, but that's an incredibly selfless, big-minded thing for someone to do, especially unprompted. Speaking of White and Steven's sequence with her, obviously and explicitly the scene is all about Steven getting revenge for what White did to him directly, But I also kinda have to wonder if Steven looks at himself reflected in white, at this big pink diamond, and isn't also on some level letting out a lot of his anger towards his mom. Also, it's odd to think about, but in her quote-unquote charitable escapades, White really is making good on the promise from back in Change Your Mind.
I only want you to be yourself. If you can't do that, I'll do it for you!
There's not anything else I have to talk about in this episode, is there?
Steven!
Best girls back, ayy! Beyond displaying a lot of much-needed independence, going on tours, being willing to operate alone to a certain degree, Spinell serves an interesting purpose here. Back in the movie, she was already kind of in part a Steven for Steven. The ever-cheery voice of friendship and earnest goofiness that young Steven so often was, in contrast to new, more mature and emotionally grounded Steven. Here she picks up the role again, right down to literally parroting his own words back at him. Her childlike goofiness, though tinged with an edge of darkness, still isn't too dissimilar from Steven's ever-cheerful disposition when he was younger. And, the fact that she's slowly transforming into Sonic the Hedgehog isn't bad either. Also, Blue Song, yay! It's really sweet, even if the fact that she of all characters got the last diegetic song in this show is kinda odd to think about. Anyway, moving on. Full disclosure, I took advantage of Cartoon Network having officially released Homeworld Bound early on the CN app, and I quite honestly think my viewing experience was better for it. Since in its full context, I think Everything's Fine works better as the first part in a final trilogy of episodes than Homeworld Bound does as the start of a four-parter. The diamonds are and always have been an integral part of the series' story, and the relationships that they and Spinell have with Steven are fascinating, but naturally, it's when Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, Connie, and Greg become fully abreast of Steven's issues, particularly the gems, that it really feels like our story is pivoting towards its emotional climax. This is basically the last episode we'll ever see of good old comedic Steven Universe shenanigans, eh? It's so neat to get our first real look at Little Homeschool in a while. Marriage Counselor Garnet is great, as is seeing the other Pearls, Larimar, etc. again, and hey, check it out, volleyball's here too! Even if we're still being super coy about whether or not her eye is fixed. But of course, the fun and games is just up front. It's kind of fitting that after Steven sinks as low as he possibly could, turning malicious and violent when even the diamonds of Spinell are virtuous and compassionate, that Steven opts to just willfully throw himself into a quote-unquote breather episode scenario. In a move I'm sure many can relate to, Steven attempts to rebound from his low point by snapping himself back into a mindset from before everything went south. Basically trying to fool himself in the same way he's been trying to fool everyone else all season, and then hoping everything else just clicks into place around him. It's ironic that Spinell's not here, since what Steven does is basically hard reset his brain after all the messed up stuff he's done sets in one last-ditch effort to avoid owning up to his pain. Going over to help at Little Homeworld not only gives Steven the chance to give defining himself by his utility to others one last shot, perhaps maybe even internalizing how that's exactly what the Diamonds have done, it allows him to diffuse his escalating angst with something comparatively very low stakes. That way, if he screws up and creates an army of Plant Stevens, he can play it off just as an unfortunate escapade to be learned from. By contrast, even the smallest of victories becomes something he can actually indulge in. Of course, when that disproportionate indulgence leads to the destruction of someone's home, it turns out that isn't so low stakes after all. The whole lark does come as a bit of relief after his 2 attempted murders, but the undercurrent of tension and pain remains constant until the literally explosive final moments. And minor tangent, but Zach Callison's voice acting for me might be the most impactful it's ever been in this scene. The way his vocals and the way the character is animated work to portray Steven's journey from deflecting to spiraling is just so real it hurts. A lot of us can relate to imposter syndrome, but Steven's circumstances are unique to say the least. Poor guy has spent the last 15 episodes and change trying anything to define who exactly Steven Universe is when he isn't dictating his personality and values based solely on what others need. And the results of that has been someone who's done almost nothing but cause problems, make people uncomfortable, pile on layers upon layers of tension to his most important relationships, destroy other people's property, oh yeah, and also have the urge to murder people. Is it any wonder that he thinks he's a monster? Monster Steven is, quite honestly, maybe the most terrifying thing this show has ever done. The design is so unlike anything else in the franchise. Actually, you know what he reminds me of? You, but from Partners in Time. I've seen and had some discussions with people who feel that Steven becoming a monster was an iffy story choice. Maybe even gratuitous and unnecessary, especially given that we didn't really get much in the way of actual action as far as taking him down. I, as usual, have to politely disagree. Steven becoming a monster isn't about setting him up as a big external threat to be taken down. It's not about giving us a blowout of a final action scene. It's about visually, physically making his pain and turmoil too big and imposing and present for any member of his family to ignore the role they played in its presence. I think it also holds significance that Steven becomes a big, hulking, mindless beast and not like just an even bigger, angrier, louder version of himself. It matters that Steven becomes something that is visually and sonically so not Steven. He can't speak, let alone sing. He looks nothing like himself because he's not himself anymore. That's perfectly fitting, given Future has been about Steven's lost sense of identity. He literally and totally loses all sense of personhood to the overwhelming spiral of emotion. So he hulks out into a great big voiceless, thoughtless mass of pure, directionless, destructive angst. We'll get into Connie being the true MVP of the episode, and by extension kind of the entire show, in just a bit. But I think the preceding scenes of characters blaming themselves for Steven's condition was in fact necessary, and not just as a confirmation for the audience that these characters do in fact have self-awareness regarding how they failed as parents and people. I've maintained for a long time that among the many other things Steven Universe is about, self-improvement, optimism, identity, love, and friendship, it's a show about parents. Parenthood, parent-child relationships, whatever. And I think it's meaningful that with the exception of Spinell, all those voicing their guilt over Steven's fate have, to varying degrees, served as parental figures for him across his life. Yellow, blue, white, gray, amethyst, pearl, and garnet were all really flawed examples to look up to, and Steven had to grow up faster than he should have because of their choices. The problem isn't even necessarily that they weren't there when he needed them, but that they never fully realized how much Steven had defined himself as the fixer to all their myriad problems. The closest to ever getting it was probably Amethyst. Even beyond the idea of parenthood, Steven isn't alone on that beach in having hurt people. Not by a long shot. Pretty much every single person on that beach has caused him direct harm before the relationship was reoriented with Steven as the emotional pack leader. Steven always gave more than he got, and now he doesn't even know what's left. It's down to everyone else to reassure him, from first-hand experience, that he's not defined by his mistakes and that what he is a good person. To snap them into action, they need Connie. Connie basically being the Hawkeye of the group.
It's your fault, it's everyone's fault, who cares? Doesn't matter what you did, what you were.
Everyone's failed Steven. That's just a fact. It's their fault. It's everyone's fault. But what matters now isn't being caught in the past. It doesn't matter what they did or what they were. The need for action supersedes guilt. Steven never, ever asked that the people in his life feel bad about the bad things they did, only that they start doing good things, and Connie gets it. Connie, who entered this show in such an innocuous way and remained a comparatively grounded presence for so long, was always Steven's emotional equal. In a show where Steven's other most important relationships were parental ones, where everyone was either older, carrying their own unresolved scars, looking ahead in life, or, onion, Connie was Steven's peer. The one who, no matter what Steven tried to hide, could see him for him. At the end of the day, I don't know if I could think of anything better than ending with Lion. Also, it's cool to see Buck and his dad just hanging out. So, Steven's not on medication, but he is getting actual therapy. Yes! Yes! The show doesn't end with Steven having magically discovered who he is. The show ends with him just taking the first steps toward cultivating a new identity. Fitting. Identity is, after all, a process, not a fixed state. Lapis warns Steven that he can't run from himself, but I think it's clear that's not what he's doing by leaving. If anything, Steven is cutting ties so that he can at last find himself. Steven's just gotta dip. I find it fitting that one of the first things we do in this episode is refer to Sadie and Lars, since Steven is basically taking a page out of their book and leaving the nest when there's nothing there for him anymore. The hesitancy of the gems to show their tears in this show of all shows feels appropriate. Definitely feels like they're acting on behalf of Rebecca herself, maybe, if not the audience. We all knew that this would be a sad goodbye, but perhaps just burying the feelings and letting it happen would let things go smoother. Not so, obviously. If I could just be frank for a bit. This feels right. Ending things. Here and now, I mean. Steven Universe has had a good long run. 7 years. More than most TV shows get to dream of. Especially cartoons. Just leaving behind a hell of a legacy in its wake. Not just, flagship show for Cartoon Network. Which it was. I don't think that's debatable at this stage. But it's one of the defining cartoons of the decade, I'd argue. It's my opinion. I'm biased, clearly. One of the defining cartoons of my life. Definitely defining pieces of media of my life, even. And I never really felt right that I've had this channel for as long as I had, and I've only just recently even started talking about it. It's one of my big YouTube regrets, I think. Never taking the time, always making excuses as to why I never found the time to talk about this show. For 5 years. So long. And now I'm here. And it's over. Like really, properly over. And I should feel sad? Forlorn, wistful, pick one. And I guess I kind of am, but not really. Like, I haven't cried yet. Who knows, maybe I'll have my cry later when it all really dawns on me. But this feels kind of like right. We're going through hard times right now. As a planet, as a country. And I guess if I'm sad about anything, it's that with the exit of this show, another light has gone out. But there'll be more. There'll always be more art by people who are really just out to make a positive change in the world. I know that there are people like myself, like my sister, who learned a lot from this show, who got into this show at a dark time, were helped by this show through a lot of dark times, who became better people because of Rebecca Sugar and the crew behind this show and the voice actors and the real living, breathing, animated characters that we got to live with for a good 7 years. And there will be more. There will be more media like this to help those who need it. And, just to be a good show for those who need a good show in their lives. 2019, 2020, end of a lot of things. The end of this show, the end of two of my other favorite shows, Good Place, BoJack Horseman. It's the end of the Infinity Saga, for however much stock you put in that. And I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of pauses. There's going to be a lot of pauses here, and it's going to be really annoying because I'm still processing. I feel prepared. This feels right. And maybe it's just because, this is an epilogue to what was already a very finale with Change Your Mind over a year ago. So, hey, we were on borrowed time. This show got to end 3 times, basically. I don't feel sad, I don't think. I feel like I got to watch a story end satisfactorily. I feel like I got to watch a character that I relate to, and that I admire, that I still wish I could be more like, go through some things, and come out the other side a better person, and still have more things left to do, more things to figure out. Change Your Mind was our happily ever after as a fan base for the characters, and then from the movie to now, we've gotten to really get to digest the fact that there is no such thing. Like BoJack Horseman says, there's happily ever after, and then there's a day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. And I think the interesting thing about this ending and the ending to BoJack and Good Place and Avengers Endgame is that they end, and there's still more story left to tell, because that's life. You get to feel an ending, and then that part of your life is over, but there's still more life left. And some of us die or leave. But for those of us that are left, there's still more life left to live. And dear God, it's such a long video. Steven's left Beach City. And Beach City and its accoutrement, and garnet and amethyst and pearl, grade, bismuth, lapis peridot, jasper, white, blue, yellow, spinel, Connie, lion. Can't forget lion. They've all left us. And who knows what Rebecca Sugar has got planned for the future. Who knows what's coming to Cartoon Network. Who knows what 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line will emerge as the definitive Cartoon Network show of this decade. Who knows? Maybe it'll come in a week. But we got to live a good long time with this. And they grew and we grew. Now it's time to move on. It's time to move on. I think I'll always regret not talking as much about this show as I've wanted to. I don't think that sense of missed opportunity will ever leave me, and it would feel wrong to start from the beginning now. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll change my mind. Who knows? But right now I think it'd feel wrong to try and go back and talk about this show from the beginning. To try and change the past, I guess. God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, cast and crew of this show. Thank you, Rebecca Sugar. Thank you, Cartoon Network. Thank you for caring about this nonsense that I have to say about this show. Thank you to the members of the fan base who are really constructive and productive and openly emotional and made experiencing this show something special. Now, all I can do is, try to take what this show's offered and make it part of myself in a way that matters and means something. And just, try to be a better person. God. Even this feels inadequate. You just gotta do what you can, I guess. Steven Universe will always be one of my favorite shows of all time, probably. And I feel privileged to have gotten to live in a world where it exists. That's it. That's the end. See you in the future.
It's over, isn't it? It's over, isn't it? It's over, isn't it?